Yes, God. All right.
This meeting is being recorded. By continuing to be in the meeting, you are consenting to being recorded. I opt to continue.
Thank you, David. I appreciate that. So, David, the first question actually I have for you is, how did you discover Star Trek and what inspired you about it?
I don't know that I discovered Star Trek. Many people had found out about it before I arrived. I personally came to Star Trek as a child. I grew up watching the original series in syndicated reruns in the early 1970s. And I quickly fell in love with the show. It was my gateway to the future. It imprinted on me. I imprinted on the show the way a young duckling imprints on the first moving thing it sees. And so the Star Trek ethos, its ideology, its message of inclusion, of tolerance, acceptance, fairness, of teamwork and friendship, it became my template for life. And as a result, I have loved Star Trek all of my life. And I am just beyond thrilled that I've gotten to spend a good chunk of my adult life contributing to and being part of something that I've loved since I was a child.
Well, how did you get involved then writing Star Trek novels?
How did I get involved writing Star Trek novels? That sounds like a question you would put to someone on the witness stand. So, how did you become involved with the Bratva? Well, Your Honor, since you asked, first I should find out, do you want the long answer or do you want the Reader's Digest answer? Because I can give you varying levels of detail here.
Go for it. We got time if you got time.
Okay. Well, I started out wanting to write for the TV show. The first of the sequel series, Star Trek The Next Generation, debuted when I started film school at NYU. And I was studying screenwriting, and I thought, this would be pretty cool because they announced an open door policy for spec scripts. It had to be a complete script, not a story pitch. And you had to follow TV format, and you could only submit one at a time. But I thought, I'm going to film school. I should try this. So I started working on submitting spec scripts to Star Trek The Next Generation as soon as I possibly could. And I continued throughout college and after I graduated. Never made it out of the slush pile. But the same policy was enacted at Star Trek Deep Space Nine. I continued over there. Some I submitted solo, some with various writing partners, collected more rejections. And at a certain point, I was beginning to get a little frustrated. My college buddy, Glenn Howman, who is also a Trek author of some short pieces for Star Trek SCE, he suggested that I start attending this lunch that at the time happened every Wednesday in Manhattan. And it was a luncheon that attracted authors, editors, agents, actors, various people from the creative community of New York, who would gather at this particular diner every Wednesday at noon and just shoot the breeze and make friends and talk shop. So I started going to this lunch, and it was there that I met John Ordover, who at that time was the senior editor of Star Trek Fiction at Pocket Books. And that was why Glenn had wanted me to go. He thought perhaps I could meet John and get involved with writing Star Trek novels, since I was not having a lot of luck with the show. So I started going to lunch and hanging out with John, and I expressed my interest in writing for the Star Trek books at that time. This was around 93, 94, somewhere in there. And he gave me a set of guidelines that I took home, and I had been working on my novel submission for some time, many weeks, and I thought I had come up with the most brilliant, groundbreaking idea for a Star Trek novel in the history of Star Trek novels. I went home, I read the writer's guidelines, and I discovered, to my dismay, that I had violated absolutely every single precept that they tell you not to do. They have a whole bunch of bullet points saying, don't do this, and we don't want any stories that have this, and we don't want this, and we don't want this, and we sure don't want this. I went down the list. My proposal hit every single one. Every one. It's like I was some sort of savant. I was like the anti-Mozart. I was Salieri writ large. So realizing that this was just going to tick him off if I tried to submit this, I got rid of that pitch. I deleted the documents. I burned the paper copies to make sure they couldn't be found and later used against me. But I kept going to lunch. And John was on the distribution list for the scripts at that time. And so I went back to writing spec scripts, and he would give me advice on how to write a better spec script based on what he knew was coming in continuity. And at some point I said, if you're going to give me this much advice on a script, we should really just write the darn thing together. Let me try that again without the frog in my throat. So I eventually said, if you're going to give me that much advice, why don't we just write the script together? He said, why don't we? So we teamed up. We refined our working method because I knew what the requirements of the Writers Guild would be based on my research and the education I'd had at NYU Film. And long story short, John and I made some sales off of our first couple of pitch meetings, first at Star Trek Voyager, and then subsequently a couple weeks later, 2 sales at Star Trek Deep Space Nine. We never got that lucky again. We don't know why. But it led to that partnership. It got me credits. It got me produced episodes on the air. And with those credits under my belt, but still needing more freelance income to pay my student loans and keep up with New York City rent, John started giving me scut work around the editorial office at Star Trek. So I would do things like read Star Trek slush manuscripts and write rejection letters for the editors to spare them the time. I would write reference materials for other Star Trek authors. I would occasionally write small bits of filler material when needed for little projects here and there. I ended up working for a time with the Star Trek Omnipedia team, which was putting together a CD-ROM of reference material, basically a CD-ROM encyclopedia. It was very similar to the Star Trek encyclopedia. It repurposed a lot of that content. My job was a mixture of editing, some short bits of writing, and then primarily I was pulling video clips and doing multimedia production to sort of help augment some of the entries with more interesting audiovisual material. So when you put all that together over a span of years, encyclopedic knowledge of Star Trek, credits writing for the show, a general facility for writing clean prose, and the fact that I'm local and can come in and meet with editors on a moment's notice, when a gig came along to, fill out a manuscript that had come up short by about 5,000 words, and they said, can you write 5,000 words in one weekend in the style of an internal Starfleet or Federation political or military report about the Genesis device that we can plug into this book right here? And I said, yeah, of course I can do that. I had no idea if I could do that, but you always say yes when offered a paying job. So I said yes. I went home. I did the work. I made my deadline. They said, hey, you're reliable in a pinch and you write quickly. We like that. We have some other projects we'd like you to write. We have this book over here. It's all approved. It just needs a writer. And I was like, let me get this straight. I get to write a book. I get paid for writing a book. I get credit for writing the book, and I don't even have to pitch the book? Sold. So that was pretty much my entree. That led to the Starfleet Survival Guide. That was the first book I was ever hired to write. And I turned it in. They said, okay, you've proved you can finish a book. How would you like to pitch stories to our new monthly line of ebooks, Star Trek SCE, which later became known as Star Trek Corps of Engineers? I said, of course, I'd love to pitch. And I got to work with my buddy Keith DeCandido, who was editing the line with John Ordover. I wrote my first bit of narrative prose with Keith. We collaborated. I wrote the outline. He wrote the manuscript for what became a Star Trek SCE two-parter called Invincible. And the following year, I had been talking with him about a similar undertaking for a project called Wildfire, which was basically disaster, suicide mission gone wrong, except this time when the crew goes on a suicide mission, people actually die. Something never done before in Star Trek. And what happened between Invincible and Wildfire was 9/11. And I got to live through 9/11 with many millions of other New Yorkers and I got to stand in the middle of 6th Avenue and watch the towers fall with my own eyes. And I realize it sounds a bit trite to say, but the reality is that day changed a lot for me. And a couple of weeks later, or several weeks later, I was speaking with Keith, and I said, look, I know we had talked about collaborating on Wildfire, but over the last month or so, I've realized I have things that I want to say and I don't want to be filtered. How would you feel about me jumping solo on this? And Keith said, I think that's a fantastic idea, and I'll be here for whatever you need, whatever advice, whatever encouragement you need, but I think this is a great idea. And with him and John backing me all the way, I took on Wildfire by myself. It turned out really well. It made my agent cry in public on the subway while she read the manuscript. And she called me up and said, "You've made me cry in the subway. So first of all, damn you. Second, I'd like to sign you as a client." So that was good. It got a lot of good reviews. And based off of the strong sales and the strong critical reception, I was invited up to, I guess you could call it the major leagues. I'd spent my time on the minor league farm team. And after Wildfire, I was invited up to the majors to write for the paperback Star Trek novels. And that was in 2003.
Well, I have to say I loved Wildfire for the record, but I didn't cry in the subway because.
Oh, you're not that kind of guy.
Yeah, that's true. Well, let's go back just a little bit. Talk a bit about the scripts that you sold both to Deep Space Nine, because you had two sell there, and they both were produced,
Yes.
but the Voyager one was not. Could you talk about that?
Well, I can't get into too many details. There's a little bit of behind the scenes, inside baseball stuff. The shortened version of the Voyager idea was we sold them a pitch, which was based on kind of an idea from MASH. We learned that the easiest way to sell pitches back in the 90s, if you were a freelancer, was to think about bottle shows. Something cheap that could be shot on as few standing sets as possible so that the producers on the show don't need to spend any money building new sets. And preferably with minimal special effects, et cetera, minimal new guest stars. So we pitched a bottle show to Voyager called simply Sickbay. The idea was the entire episode happens in real time over the course of about 43 minutes. And every scene, every moment, the whole thing takes place in Sickbay. The ship is under attack. It's being torpedoed. The lights are going on and off. Alarm sirens are blaring. And the people in Sickbay have no idea what the hell's going on because nobody ever tells them anything. They just have to react to wounded coming through the door and calls for emergency assistance throughout the ship. So it was supposed to be a story that would focus on the EMH teaching Kes about medicine, because that was something they had done with Kes and the EMH around the end of season 1. And this would have been an episode for the first maybe 10 or 12 episodes of season 2. So the idea was that Kes has to learn about, for instance, the cruelty of triage for combat medicine. That combat emergency triage isn't help the people most in need of help. It's help the people you can move most quickly back off the line and put back into service. The people who are most gravely wounded and who most desperately need your help, you probably have to let them die because the time you spend trying to save them, you could have moved 6 other people back on the line to save the ship. So combat medicine, she finds out, is a very cold-blooded thing, but it's also a very real thing. It's based on the necessity of a ship in combat. And as Kes is sort of grappling with the moral implications of what she's learning about this particular aspect of medicine, near the end of the, I'd say, 3rd or 4th act, I can't remember if it was a 4 or 5 act structure back then, but near the end of the penultimate act, her lover Neelix comes in critically wounded after having done something very heroic to save a number of lives, but got himself blown up in the process. She's not willing to accept combat medicine anymore. She's been going along with it, but now it's her guy on the table. So the doctor gives in. He's going to help Kes try to save Neelix. The ship takes a hit. The power goes down. The EMH's program goes out. And suddenly the laser scalpel falls to the floor, and there's Kes standing alone in the dark with her lover cut open on the table in front of her, the laser scalpel on the floor at her feet, and now it's all up to her. And it was going to be like one of those great dun 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 out to commercial with the audience going, how the hell is she going to get out of this one? And then, of course, Harry Kim gets the voice of the doctor back online, and the doctor talks her through the surgery like, air control talking an amateur pilot, into landing the 747. And it would have been a fun, sort of a compact little episode, but there were just a number of realities behind the scenes that we weren't aware of, things that changed in the status quo at the show between when we sold it in March of 95 and when they intended to start production in the summer of 95. A number of things changed, and they just realized, we can't pull this off. We can't do this. Our priorities are now in a different direction. We have to have a different focus. And consequently, as much as they liked the idea, and they paid us for it, we got our money, but they said we can't go forward. And so, for no fault of our own, and no fault of the story, no fault of me and John, it just ended up not being produced, which was really unfortunate. I think it would have been a great hour of TV. And a couple of weeks after we pitched that to Voyager, we had our next pitch session at Deep Space Nine. And we sold one right off the bat. It was like our third story into the pitch, became Starship Down. And that was just pitched as, we're going to sink the Defiant. We want to do Das Boat for Deep Space Nine. And that intrigued the producers, and they said, tell us more. So we spun the story. We got to the end of the pitch, and they went, sold. What else you got? Keep going. We were like, we sold and we get to keep going? All right, let's keep going. And we intrigued them with another idea, which at the time was called Everybody Comes to Quarks, which was a play on Everybody Comes to Rick's, which was the name of the play on which the movie Casablanca is based. And the premise of that episode, again, a classic bottle episode, would have been every scene, every moment, the whole episode happens in Quark's bar. And the premise would be that due to a weird confluence of alien holidays, everything on the station, every place you could possibly get a meal, is closed, except Quark's, because the Ferengi don't believe any holiday is worth losing profits. So, and because it's a Bajoran holiday and all the replicators are broken, none of the Bajoran engineers are working, so we can't fix any of the other replicators on the station. The whole replicator network is down, except for Quark's, because his operate on a local network because, well, he's that kind of guy. So we would have had all these different storylines weaving in and out. We would have had Cisco and his son playing baseball in the holosuite. We'd have had Dax trying to go on a blind date. O'Brien and Bashir trying to win a darts tournament. You have Quark trying to do a deal to buy some shady black market Klingon artifact, but he can't be seen by Worf, which would have led to a hilarious confrontation in which he has to get Worf to leave without buying any lunch. We would have ended up doing a version of Monty Python's Cheese Shop sketch with Worf and Quark. It was going to be just this a whole bunch of weirdness. It was going to be one of those light episodes with nothing really critical on the line, just a fun, light, funny, entertaining hour, kind of in the spirit of Little Green Men, Our Man Bashir, something like that. And they liked it, but they weren't sure it fit their needs, maybe because it didn't have that heavy story to anchor it, and they weren't sure if it could support an hour of TV by itself. But they liked it, and they were intrigued by it. So they kept the folder. They said, we're going to hang on to this one, and we'll get back to you. Fast forward a couple of years. We'd been pitching at that point many times. We pitched several times more to Voyager and to Deep Space Nine, never made another sale. And suddenly, at one point in, I think, late 98, they come back to us and they say, we're finally buying that Everybody Comes to Quark's pitch you gave us back in 95. John and I are surprised. We're like, hey, that's great. And they said, well, we just need to make a few changes. So we want to get you on a call with Ron Moore, and he's going to walk you through some of the changes because we're going to need you to rewrite the outline for the pitch. And we said, oh, sure. Yeah, that's fine. Whatever you need. So we get on this call with Ron Moore, and Ron says, okay, here are the key changes. Instead of taking place in Quark's bar, the story will now be primarily set in the Vic Fontaine Las Vegas holosuites. John and I are like, okay, sure, all right. And now instead of all those subplots you had running and threading and going around each other, it's all going to be about Nog, who's lost a leg in the previous episode in combat, and now he's choosing to do his therapy in the holosuite. Okay. Anything else? Yeah, we just need, need you to do this and rewrite it along these lines, and to just get it back to us by Monday. And John and I are like, okay, one question: why is Nog doing his therapy in a Vegas holosuite? And I swear to God, Ron's answer was, well, you tell me, it's your story. What? But, head explodes. And then you go, okay, Ron, we'll have you an outline by Monday. No problem. Got it. And you got to come up with something. And fortunately, what we did come up with was post-traumatic stress disorder. Not us personally. That was the story solution we came up with for Nog. And it turned into the episode, It's Only a Paper Moon, which is probably one of the contributions to Star Trek of which I am most proud 20 some odd years later. So those were the various episodes that John and I pitched, and the sort of quick version of how each of them came to be.
I love those stories. Thank you so much. And love those episodes too. And for the record, I would love to have seen that Voyager episode.
So would I. It would have really been something.
Oh, for sure. Could you talk a bit about working with other Trek authors creating original novel series like Vanguard?
Well, Vanguard is my principal experience in that field. And the way Vanguard came about, it originated with editor Marco Palmieri. He had an idea for a series that would be set during the time of the original series, but that would not involve the Enterprise or any of that ilk. It would involve a new cast of characters. He wanted something that didn't follow the usual Star Trek paradigm of captain, first officer, chief medical officer, security officer, et cetera, et cetera. He wanted something that would depict a broader scope of Federation life, of Starfleet experience. He wanted something a little grittier, a little more modern in its sensibility and its politics. And he eventually, put together some basic notes. Originally, his original pitch for it was called Star Trek No Man's Land. And he brought that to me in 2004, shortly after the publication of my first two paperbacks for Star Trek, A Time to Kill and A Time to Heal. Time to Heal, it hit the USA Today list. Both books had been very well reviewed and well received and were selling pretty well. And I guess he was impressed enough that he was willing to take a chance on letting me be the guy who would help him put the series together. So he brought me what he had, and the first thing he asked me to put together was a series Bible. And in addition to developing out all the characters, giving them names, developing the backstory, thinking about the world building and how this series would fit into Star Trek history and Star Trek continuity of that period without contradicting any of it, without clashing with any of it. Another thing he asked me to do was to design it as a series that would have a variety of writers working on it, much as he had done with his post-finale books for Deep Space Nine. So the reason the series needed to have a detailed writer's guide, a writer's Bible, as it were, was so that it could be given to each prospective author that he wanted to approach and give them pretty much everything they needed to know about the series, about the setting, the characters, their dynamics, the overall plot arc of the series, what it's about, where it's going, what kind of pacing we expect it to have. So I included all of that. I even did a little page where I took all the principal and major supporting characters and going down a list, comparing each of them to another, I said, what would be the interpersonal dynamic of these two characters, and now these two characters? And sometimes I would describe it as, cat and mouse, or, he respects the freedom of the press, but not in his OR, stuff like that. And I would sort of give a shorthand to another writer coming in if they were saying, I got to write a scene in which this character talks to that guy. What's their dynamic? And they could just flip to this page and say, oh, that's the dynamic. Okay, so I think along those lines. Perfect. So I put together roughly a 30 some odd page series Bible, complete with actor templates, thinking, when you picture this character, think of them played by this actor. It gives you sort of a shorthand for voice, for appearance, etc. And I did that for all the major characters, most of the primary supporting cast, did a brief overview of, the first 6 books and how that arc might play out. And as I was putting it together, thinking about the authors who at that time were working for Star Trek writing novels, I came up with ideas that I thought would suit a variety of different writers. I thought, well, if we set it up this way, then this book would be suited to the talents of Dayton and Kevin. This one would be a great one to bring in Keith DeCandido. This would be a great book for David R. George. This would be a great idea for Heather Jarman or for Kirsten Beyer. So I was thinking in terms of creating opportunities that were tailored to the known strengths and proclivities of the authors in the lineup at that time. So I put all this together, and Marco was very happy. I got to write the first book, Harbinger. And the way I had arranged the pieces, the way I had set up the game, I had deliberately rigged it so that the only logical choice to write book 2 was Dayton Ward and Kevin Dillmore. Now, these guys were my buddies. We had met at Shore Leave the previous summer. We'd gotten to be friends. We were hanging out. We made each other laugh. They were good guys, and I wanted to work with them, and I thought that they would have fun because I knew they loved this particular era of Star Trek as much as I did. And I thought it would be a real hoot, to have them come aboard for book 2. So I arranged the pieces so that when Marco said, who's perfect for book 2? There's only one good answer. So they come in, they do book 2. And Marco shares with me both the outline for book 2 and the manuscript for book 2 to get my feedback as the series co-creator. And I was so impressed with where they had taken it, the way they had elevated certain parts of the storyline, that I said, wow, this is a lot of fun. And this has given me a lot of great ideas, which I immediately started pitching back to Marco. And he was like, I hadn't really thought about having you write book 3, but you do have a lot of these great ideas. You seem really excited about it. Do you want to come back and write book 3? I said, I'd love to. And we thought maybe at that time we would set up a pattern where I would write every other book and the alternating books would go to different authors. But then after I did book 3 and I was talking about it with Dayton and Kevin, and they immediately started riffing ideas back, well, I put them in touch with Marco again, and Marco at that point realized that we had an interesting dynamic going on, me and the guys, where I would do something and then they would top me, and then I would have to top that. We had gotten into this game of one-upmanship. I blow up a starship, so they blow up a planet, so I wipe out a star system. At which point the guys go, okay, maybe we need to rethink what we're doing here. But they kept upping the stakes. And he realized this is a really great storytelling opportunity. This is a dynamic we haven't seen before in a Star Trek book series. A pair of authors on one side and a solo author on the other, alternating in artistic conversation, elevating each other's ideas, challenging each other, throwing curveballs at each other narratively to see how the other handles it. It made for a really interesting and unpredictable creative dynamic that pushed the series to be far better than I think it would have been had I been left to work alone. I think that because there were, 2 other brilliant minds coming at this, challenging my conceptions about the story, and then adding new elements to which I then had to react, it just made the whole thing better. And it made it more fun to have somebody to share ideas with and be able to bounce ideas off of while working on outlines or manuscripts. And as a result, I feel to this day that the Star Trek Vanguard series is probably the creative highlight of my career so far. I think it's probably one of the best things I've ever done. And it's certainly some of the most fun I've ever had as a writer, collaborating with Dayton and Kevin and Marco, and also to a lesser degree with James Swallow, who did a Mirror Universe take on Vanguard. Um, Working with these guys has just been tremendous fun. Because writing can be a very lonely business, very solitary. And to be able to collaborate with somebody who you get along with as friends and make each other better at what you're doing in the process is creatively rewarding, and it's professional, personally, emotionally very rewarding as well. So I don't know if other authors feel the same way. I know not everybody loves collaboration. I don't always love it. I won't collaborate on an individual manuscript, but on a series concept like this, I think that it was the best possible solution that could have happened for that series, and I wouldn't change a thing about it.
Well, for the record, just happened this morning before we talked. Another author and I pitched a concept series to Thomas and Mercer, and it sounds like they're interested. So keep your fingers crossed.
Well,
So I totally
Good luck.
understand. Oh, thank you. Totally understand about the collaboration thing and
Absolutely.
being writing by yourself for sure. And
Absolutely.
by the way, I'm having so much fun back here. I'm like, wait a minute, I'm supposed to be actually asking you questions. Like, just keep talking. But anyway, um, I love this. I would like to know how you're a Trek fan, obviously. How do
Oh,
you bring other genres into the stories, which I really appreciate. And I'm talking like thriller, the action adventure. Nobody else seems to really do that. And you have probably the highest body count I've ever seen in my entire life, which I also appreciate.
well, Keith
Um,
is wiped out. Keith DeCandido's wiped out multiple alternate universes, so he's bucking for the crown.
okay, well,
Although
how do
I
you?
am going to give him a run for his money.
Oh, I can't wait to see that.
Oh yeah, yeah. We're raising the stakes. We're pushing all in.
Well, how do you find the right voice and fit for the stories you write?
I mean, it's just a matter of tone. Not every story wants to be told the same way. The sort of tragic, epic Lord of the Rings style voice that is appropriate to a project like Star Trek Destiny doesn't work on, say, a smaller, more intimate project like Wildfire, which, while tragic, operates on a much more intimate level, a less grandiose scale. And some of my stories have been downright sarcastic and funny. For instance, my short story for the New Frontier anthology, which is titled Waiting for Godot, or How I Learned to Stop Moving and Hate People, which is all about the Zach Kebron Brickar character and having to go undercover as a park statue, which, you know, is just one of these ridiculous ideas. And so the whole story is written in this very high level of snark, which was meant to emulate the kind of snark that Peter David excels at in his New Frontier series. But I find that I switch gears depending on what the story demands. If I'm writing a light-hearted thriller that has to move quickly, then I adopt that tone. If I'm writing a more of a Tom Clancy military techno thriller, then I try to stick to that. Or sometimes I'll start with one as a feint, as a misdirect, and then I'll switch it up without warning you. I started that way in Fortunes of War, or Fortune of War, I'm sorry, singular, Fortune of War, which was my Titan novel. I start out leading you to believe that it's a light-hearted thriller romp, you know, caper type of thing. And then suddenly, right around the midpoint, as you hit the midpoint reversal in the story, the whole thing turns deadly. I mean, massive, bloody body count. And suddenly you realize this is no lighthearted caper. These are arms dealers and military technical specialists and strike teams all fighting over weapons of mass destruction. This is not a caper. This is about to become a bloodbath. And sometimes that's what I'll do. Is I'll deliberately mislead with one style or one tone early in the story and then it switches, and I'll say, you thought it was this, now you realize it's that. So I'll do stuff like that. Sometimes you want to thread one or more tones into the same story. You want to have a romance on the one side. You want to have a thriller thing going on another. I've been doing stuff like that with Bashir through his whole Section 31 arc, which is run for about 5 novels. And I'm planning to revisit Bashir. We're going to see Bashir again before this is all over, before the books completely succumb to being about the new shows. There will be at least one more outing. We're going to see some of our favorite characters again. We're going to try and bring some closure to ongoing storylines. But I guess I've always been a fan of stories in general, and I find that I like to change things up. I don't want to write the same story that I've already written a dozen times. I like to mix it up. I want to throw in a bit of comedy. I want to throw in a bit of romance, a bit of mystery, a little whodunit. Sometimes you just want a bit of a caper. Sometimes you just want some slapstick. So I try to just follow the muse.
Well, for the record, I'm hoping that novels about the other shows continue rather than just being the new stuff, even though don't get me wrong, I like that. Are we going to get to see your Kelvinverse book at some point?
It is on the schedule. It is scheduled and has been scheduled for August 11 for some time. So at this time, I have not been informed of any delays, no postponements. However, that could change. The current situation with the COVID-19 crisis has interrupted a number of supply chains that affect the publishing industry. Not just the editorial staffs themselves, although that is an important factor. Another element you have to consider is that the companies and the teams that make the paper on which books are printed, they're disrupted. The people who operate the trucks and the ships that transport that paper from where it's produced and warehoused to where it is used by printers, that model is disrupted. Many printers of large-scale stuff like books, they work on what's called a just-in-time inventory model, where they keep only enough paper stock on hand for the jobs they are imminently about to do. And more stock arrives just in time for the next gig. But when the supply line gets disrupted, supplies run out very quickly. And if they run out of paper, that's it. The presses stop. But even if they could print them, it wouldn't matter because there'd be nobody to take them to the warehouses. And even if they got them to the warehouses, it wouldn't matter because there's no drivers to take them to the bookstores or to Amazon. And if they could, it wouldn't matter because Amazon's not accepting them and the bookstores are all closed. So the supply chain is disrupted at so many points, from production, from editorial, through book production and printing, through transportation, warehousing, retail. The whole network is just disrupted. So as far as I know at this time, my Kelvinverse novel, as they call it, is still on schedule for August 11. It's called More Beautiful Than Death. They're finalizing the cover now. Hopefully that'll be released soon. But in this uncertain time, there's really no promises. I'm hoping the book continues to come out on August 11. I had another book coming out this summer, originally scheduled for June 9, and that was The Shadow Commission, the third book of my Dark Arts trilogy from Tor Books. But again, due to disruptions in the production process and the shipping and retail, it got pushed from June 9 to August 11. So at the moment, I'm supposed to have 2 books out on August 11, 2020. We'll see if that happens. Again, right now, nobody can promise anything.
Well, good luck, and I'm looking forward to reading it. I'm reading the Alan Dean Foster one now, and I'm enjoying that immensely. I got a digital copy of it.
Oh, very good.
Yeah. So can you talk a bit about what you're doing currently for the franchise? I know you have a CBS consultant role.
Mm-hmm.
What can you talk about?
Not a whole lot. I can sort of give you the ballpark idea of what I do. I work for two of the upcoming Star Trek TV series, both of them animated. One has already been well announced, and that's Lower Decks from Mike McMahon and his writing team. And that will hopefully be debuting this year, 2020, on CBS All Access. I think the earliest we can expect to see the other series, which is from the Hageman brothers, will probably be next year, 2021, possibly not even till 2022, depending on, again, whether the current crisis drags out or causes disruptions in their production timeline. My role as a consultant is I get the story outlines or I get the scripts from each show. My job is go through them, flag anything that I feel or that I know contradicts Star Trek canon continuity. I look for ways to say things that are Trekkier than what they have. Like they may say one thing for a tech description of an event, or they'll have some technobabble in a dialogue. And I'll say, well, a Trekkier way to say that would be to say this. So I suggest Trekkier dialogue. I point out little things if I think they clash with Star Trek ideology, the Star Trek ethos, Federation ethos. My job is essentially to be kind of like a Star Trek Sherpa. I don't tell them where to go. They tell me where we're going. My job is to help them get there in the Trekkiest way possible while avoiding pitfalls and missteps that could cost them time and money. That's essentially my job. I'm not there to tell anybody what to do. I'm simply there to help them find the Trekkiest way to do it and to save them time, save them money when I can, to make suggestions. And if I spot something that I think is wrong or busted, my job is not just to say this is busted, but to have a solution ready to go the moment I point it out, to say, well, this isn't quite right, but here's what you could do. You could do this and this, and then continue to have what you're shooting for here, but then it would be Trekkie. So that's the core nut of what I do for both shows.
So essentially, you hit the Yeti with a big stick. Got it.
I stand between them and the Yeti, and I let the Yeti maul me while they run.
Okay, gotcha.
And then when they plant the flag on the mountaintop, my job is to get out of frame.
Okay, gotcha. I love it. I'm looking forward to those shows. So,
oh, they're going to be good. You guys are going to have a hoot. Lower Decks is completely irreverent, plays fast and loose, and makes Star Trek sort of not take itself so seriously anymore. And then the Nickelodeon show from the Hageman brothers, I can't really say too much about it except that it's very smart Star Trek. And even though they say it's aimed at a younger audience to try and bring in a new generation of Star Trek fans, adults who are going to watch the show with their kids will not feel their intelligence is being insulted. You won't feel like you're being talked down to. It's very smart. It's got good heart. It's funny. Great characters, and a really well thought out long-term story arc overall. It's really going to be just not just a good animated series for kids. It's just going to be good Star Trek.
Oh, I cannot wait.
Yeah, it's going to look amazing. I can't say anything. I can't show you anything, but I've seen the lookbook, which is sort of like when they do the first pass. This is going to be the look and feel and style of the show and the characters and the environments. Part of the reason the Nickelodeon show is taking so long to produce is it's going to be absolutely beautiful. You're going to be blown away.
That is so cool. So the next question I have for you is, what is your favorite Star Trek series? And of that series, what is your favorite episode? And if you say DS9 and your one you wrote, that doesn't count.
Well, DS9 does count. It doesn't matter that I wrote for it. I still think DS9 is overall, soup to nuts, the best of the Star Trek series to date. Something may supplant it someday. It hasn't happened yet. As for the best episode, no, I would not be brazen enough to suggest my own episodes. That would be preposterous. My favorites, I mean, I have a few. I mean, obviously, everybody loves In the Pale Moonlight. And I love the darkness of it, but that's not really where my taste goes. My sensibilities, I have to admit, my favorite is probably The Visitor, which is a tour de force performance by both Cyril Lofton and then also by Tony Todd playing the older version of Jake. And for those who don't remember, it's a relatively early episode from the series. The premise is that we're aboard the Defiant, and some sort of accident occurs in the engine room. Jake is there, and Cisco is there. And Cisco seems to be zapped out of existence right in front of Jake's eyes. So Jake thinks he's seen the death of his father. But then, at various intervals, his father reappears to him as if he's been jolted out of time, but he's still somehow connected by some sort of temporal rubber band, let's say, to Jake. So wherever Jake is, whatever Jake's doing, his father comes back to him. But the intervals between these appearances are getting longer and longer. And at some point, Jake figures out that the way to save his father and reset time is for Jake to die during one of these visitations by his father. And it's absolutely heartbreaking. Beautifully played by Tony Todd, but even more heartbreakingly played by Avery Brooks, as he realizes, he's with his son who has grown old and that he's missed his son's whole life, and then seeing his son sacrifice himself. In many ways, it's an allegory for parents who feel like, they've gotten consumed by their careers and have missed all of the key moments of the lives of those they love. But it's also just a really beautiful exploration of the dynamic between father and son with these two characters who together form the heart of the DS9 series. It's a real tearjerker of an episode, which is probably why I love it. It's very emotionally affecting. It's beautifully written, and it's not heavy on special effects. It's really, it's a writers and actors tour de force type of piece. It's not a big showy special effects thing. It's all about the writing and the performance, and that's what I love about The Visitor.
I would say that's my favorite DS9 as well. And I saw it for the first time as a non-parent, and seeing it again as a parent, sharing it with my kids. Holy moly, it was a completely different experience for sure. Yeah. Who are the top two favorite Star Trek characters for you?
I'm not really sure I could narrow that down. I mean, I love so many of them for their own reasons and in their own way. I mean, if we want to limit it to TV characters, is that, first of all, are we limiting it to just the TV and film characters?
I would say yes for the sake of this.
All right, then for the sake of this, you want me to narrow it to two? I'll go with Spock and Worf.
Okay, I'll go with that. Since you have a hand in what's coming up in the future, we have Discovery, we have Picard. Yes. What do you see as the future of Star Trek?
More shows on a broader scale, exploring different facets of Federation life, of 24th century life and beyond. I think that eventually, at some point, and we're already going to start seeing this with Section 31 show, we're going to start breaking away from the Starfleet is our key window into Star Trek. We've also seen this very clearly in Picard, because part of what Patrick Stewart and the writers' room really were insistent upon was that it not just be another Starfleet ship with the classic old Starfleet paradigm. They wanted civilians. They wanted a different dynamic, people with different backgrounds, different personalities. They wanted a different look and feel for the show. And I think they've achieved that. And I think we're going to see more of that. I think we're going to see a broadening of the view of what the 24th century can be and what it can represent.
I cannot wait for Discovery Season 3 and the shows you're working on as a consultant. It's so great to have Star Trek back after so long. So yeah. Beyond the novels, of course. Obviously, I'm a lover of the novels. So
well, we did our best to keep the fires lit.
So the last thing I have for you is I'm going to put you to a test. You didn't know there was an exam. Could you
I'd have studied harder and drunk more.
could you do the Space the Final Frontier
The
and then do
whole
a
the
yeah,
whole
and then
monologue?
yeah, and then do a Live
I
Long and Prosper
probably
for
not.
me?
Probably not.
Okay. That's what I was wondering. What we're talking about doing on our end is editing people together to say that whole thing out.
I see. I mean,
But
I can try. I mean, I can try looking it up or something.
well,
You talking about
whatever you want to
TOS?
do.
Let's see here. I can look it up on my phone, also known as my digital outbrain. Let's go to the Google. Hello, Google.
You would be surprised. I think one person knew it by heart, and everybody else has had to look it up while I've asked that question. I love it.
Here we go. All right.
All
We'll
right.
try this.
Okay, I'll mute myself. Oh, and then when you're done, count to 2, and then give me a Live Long and Prosper.
I'll see what I can do here.
All right, I'm going to mute.
Space, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the Starship Enterprise. Its 5-year mission: to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no man has gone before. Or if you want the TNG version, to boldly go where no one has gone before. Oh, sorry, wrong hand. Live long and prosper.
That was fantastic. Thank you very much. And thanks for taking all the time with me to answer these questions. And I could talk to you for hours. I'm just loving listening to you talk. So thank you for that.
I have the gift of gab. I think I remember kissing the Blarney Stone when I went to Ireland.
Well, I will keep you posted on how things go with this. And of course, if there's anything I could do in the meantime for you, just don't hesitate. All right.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you so much.